Good afternoon, Marissa. How are you?
Hi, how are you? I'm good, thank you. You?
So today we wanted to talk a little bit more about hormones, but in particular around fasting. So
Hmm.
there are lots of, I think, misconceptions and um, yeah, I think myths and things around fasting and women. But first of all, tell us a little bit about um, kind of where some of these things may have developed from, the myths and misconceptions.
Yeah. So, is fasting safe for women? Yes. Let me make that very clear. Does it damage our hormones? No. I think the misconception came in is that we cannot fast the same as men. So we can fast, but we need to fast differently. We have, we have these fluctuating hormones throughout our cycle. And depending on what hormone it is, that hormone may require a little bit more glucose, that type of thing. And that's probably where it's come in. So fasting consistently, longer fasts consistently can be more damaging on the hormones. But if you sync your fasting with your hormones, then it's actually really beneficial. So just as a quick overview on how fasting works with our cycle, if you think of day one as your first day of your menstrual cycle, this is when our hormones are at its lowest. Okay, and then over the next 10 days from that, estrogen starts to decline. Well, an estrogen doesn't like glucose. Okay, it doesn't need glucose. So is much better without glucose and more forgiving of cortisol. So longer fasts are actually safe around that time. So any type of fasting, you could even do a 3-day fast, 5-day fast, throw yourself really into it. So depending on how experienced you are with fasting, it's safe to fast longer periods during that time. And then we come into sort of like day, between day 11 to 15, 16, because everybody's cycle is a little bit different with ovulation. And during ovulation, we now have estrogen, at its peak, testosterone is coming in as well, and we're getting a little bit of progesterone. Progesterone is a particularly more sensitive hormone. So she doesn't like cortisol very much. So we try and accommodate that by not doing very long fasts around ovulation. So probably around a maximum of 15 hours. So you wouldn't stress progesterone out too much by doing that. And then probably day 16 to 19, hormones take a dip again. And again, that's the time when you can go in for a longer fast, which is absolutely fine. And then from about day 19, 20, 21 to, again, first day of your bleed, this is where we have to be really particularly careful on fasting, because progesterone then is on the increase, and progesterone needs a little bit of glucose, needs a little bit of carbs to actually be produced efficiently and at good levels. And cortisol needs to be kept low. So, glucose a little bit higher, cortisol lower. So this is where a lot of self-care practices come in, and much shorter fasts. So maximum fast is, 12 hours, just overnight type of fast. We want to be eating our 3 meals a day during that time to make sure that we have enough progesterone. So it's not about not fasting, it's about fasting safely and in accordance with our cycle, working with our cycle. And it's actually really effective. It can be very, very beneficial in terms of weight loss, mental health, fatigue, anybody that's got any brain fog, and really in increasing our motivation, that type of thing. So it's really beneficial.
What happens in the body when we fast?
So what we're actually trying to achieve is we're trying to keep the glucose levels much lower, because every time we have a spike in glucose, we have a spike in insulin, And the more spikes in insulin we get, our cells become more and more insulin resistant, meaning that we can't actually take up that glucose efficiently enough, and that glucose is hanging about where it shouldn't be. That can increase cortisol and have a huge knock-on effect metabolically, as well as, for weight management and that type of thing. So we're really trying to keep that insulin down as much as possible.
It's interesting. You also mentioned that when progesterone goes up, it needs a little glucose. Is this why sometimes people will have kind of premenstrual cravings?
Cravings, absolutely, yes. So feeling hungry around that time of the month, a lot of women do get a bit guilty, feeling guilty that they're feeling hungry around that time of the month, and they're trying to control their diet. But that's actually not, it's not a discipline issue at all. That's actually the body saying, hey, I need some glucose, I need to produce progesterone. And if we don't get enough progesterone, of course, we can't obviously shed the lining of the uterus, and there's a lot of other implications to that. So yes, if you start listening to your body actually tells you what you need at what time of the month. But that is why we do get a little bit more craving around that time of the month.
Makes sense. Does that give us free rein to eat a lot of sugar and chocolate before our periods?
No. No. Some healthy carbs coming from complex carbohydrates. So you want to be thinking about more like root vegetables, sweet potatoes, that type of thing. Just giving progesterone a bit more carbohydrates, but obviously not all the sugar and everything else. The processed carbohydrates is not necessary. That's not what our hormones require at all.
And then one last thing before you go, talking about the hormones, do they have an influence on our kind of mood? So can you link progesterone to certain changes in mood, and can you link all these various hormones that you mentioned?
So progesterone, because she doesn't like cortisol very much, when those levels are not high enough, we can actually feel more anxious. Depression can creep in as well, a bit more moodiness, a bit more drawn in to ourselves. So naturally, we would naturally be more closed in. We want to stay at home. We want to curl up on the couch and relax, because we want to keep our cortisol levels low. But we can actually get those dips in mood around about that time. So for majority of women, that is what happens. And then unfortunately for some women where progesterone is really low at that time of the month, can be really difficult for them, and can be, really high anxiety, quite depressed as well. So it's really important to then, we're talking about fasting now, but we can go into, next time we can talk about the foods around cycle and eating for your cycle. So we want to be eating, progesterone building foods around that time of the month to help increase that progesterone, which will obviously have a positive knock-on effect on our moods.
And there's no better way of self-love, is there, than understanding your body, understanding your rhythms, and working with them rather than fighting against them?
Absolutely, yeah. And teaching our partners them as well, so that they are more tolerant with us, and serves for much better partnerships as well. So yes, but understanding your cycle, working with your hormones and not against your hormones, it's great for your waistline, your mood, your motivation, the way you turn up in the world, and just your complete experience of the world.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time today.
No problem. Thanks, Charmaine.